Okay, we'll call the meeting to order. This evening is a special meeting, and it's to go over the fiscal year 2020 budget. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Jay?
Here.
Taylor?
Here.
Kurt?
Here.
Mark?
Here.
Jeff?
Here.
Bob?
Here.
Brandy? Here. Thank you.
Okay, we have a full assembly this evening, and this evening's meeting is just basically a presentation from the finance director to the assembly. There could be additions or deletions by the assembly, but it's not scheduled on the agenda, so there won't be any public testimony. It is on the agenda, but it's don't have anything defined. So, Jody, your turn.
Thanks for coming. So the budget process up until now, if the Assembly remembers, last November, December, you approved a budget calendar and a budget policies. And then templates were sent out to the department heads, and they had about 3 to 4 months putting their budgets together. They were due by March 15th, and I put them together into one document and gave it to the borough manager to go over, and it was reviewed, and it was sent out to the assembly on April 1st. And now this is our first once over of the budget, and we could always schedule more if there's more additional questions. I'm not going line by line through this budget. It's a general overview. If you have questions about a certain department, ask, interrupt me and just say, hey, I want to know about something, or you can wait until the end, or whatever you like, So the budget is laid out. You all have a copy of it. Pages 1 through 11 are the introduction. On page 5 is actually the budget calendar, where it talks about when the budget will be brought forward to the assembly to vote on in 3 readings. So it'll be the first meetings in May, the first 2 meetings in May, and then the first meeting in June. The general fund is on pages 15 through 28. The enterprise funds 29 to 46, and the motor pool, debt service, special revenue funds. And the next page, capital projects, are from page 63 to 79, and other information such as the fund cash balances are found at the very end with the memo for the motor pool. So let's just, what I'm going to do is actually, instead of starting with the general fund, I'm going to start with the enterprise funds. Just because I think we'll spend more time on the general fund, and so I want to do that last. So our borough-wide payroll, we scheduled for 1% increases for all employees, including department heads. The PERS we're assuming is going to be capped at 22% again. Health insurance, budgeting with a 15% increase potential. We've heard that we could be looking at 14% if we keep our current plan right now, which, just so you know, the borough spends $1.35 million on health insurance for its employees. So 15% is about $200,000. So to make up for that, by cuts is very significant. And so we are looking at different healthcare plans, different premiums, different deductibles, looking at maybe possibly teaming up with the hospital and for a larger pool to keep the costs down. We'll just see. We haven't heard yet. We haven't gotten quotes back yet. So we're just, and if we do find something substantial, we'll have a supplemental budget, or maybe we'll find out in time to change the budget that's that you guys will be approving in May and June. So, workers' comp, budgeting with a 10% increase. So enterprise funds. We have 7 enterprise funds. Enterprise funds are used to provide services to the public on a user charge basis, similar to the operation of a commercial enterprise. 92% of their operating revenue are from user fees. They are not as dependent on state funds as the general fund. Their biggest challenges regarding state funding is if the state decides to cut loan programs or grant programs. The other concern is if the state increased the 22% PERS cap. And just so you know, dollars from one enterprise cannot just be given to another enterprise fund or to the general fund for that matter. It would have to be set up as a loan, and there would have to be compensation. So we, for example, the fund balance in the electric fund can't be used to pay the bills for the library, something like that. Sorry, Dara. The electric fund. So you can see industrial sales, residential sales are their biggest revenues. There is no rate increases budgeted for fiscal year 2020, but the electric fund is having a rate study done. The electric fund has an unrestricted fund balance of about $6 million. You can see that their biggest expense is power purchases from SEPA. They may have a large fund balance, but they have a lot of capital projects ongoing and planned in the future that they're going to need those reserves. Capital outlays for electric fund. They have the $75,000 to complete the insulation roofing project. That's on page 32. You'll also find $80,000 for utility mapping update, $155,000 miscellaneous capital outlays. There's also a transfer out to the auto load capital project, which is found on page 64. And the capital projects, there's more description on those pages about those projects and what they are and what the money's for. $250,000 transfer out to the Blind Slough Hydro project. We heard at a previous meeting the Blind Slough Hydro project will cost around $7 million. We're probably looking to bond about 70% of that project. You've probably looked at their 5-year renewal replacement plan spreadsheet that was put in your box that the utility director created. There are some very large projects coming up. So again, in the 2020 budget, there is money budgeted for rate study to forecast future rates needed to help cover these future projects. Water department. Oh, did anyone have any questions about the electric fund?
Just a question. On that rate study, Carl, are we going to also take a look at changing, maybe be able to change the schedule in such a way that we don't have to raise rates, or I know it's to look at the rates, but also to schedule our projects out such that we can keep our rates down as low as we can get?
Yeah, that's the goal of a rate study in general, is to try to figure out how we can get this work done that we need to get done at the lowest cost possible, keep the rates low. The rate design, I think, is what kind of you were alluding to on playing with the blocks of usage as far as electric usage, and that will be part of the mix for sure.
Okay. And one last question. Does that also then take care of where we have the transformers with 3 different voltages? I see you have on there, I believe, to reduce one of the voltages, that we have going to the airport, one of the different phase. That's part of the change.
Well, we'll look at that when we get to that project, but we still have 2,400 volts at the airport, which we can change out, and we're looking at doing an in-house project to accomplish that. But it doesn't really change the transformer at the substation, because we still have 2,400 volts coming from generators to that transformer. So we'd have to change some things at the power plant. So we may be stuck with that specialized transformer for a while.
Okay, thank you.
Member Mucci?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So the miscellaneous capital outlays, what does that all encumber? And I'm looking here, and I'm
On page 32.
page 32.
So you'll notice at the top there is the section that says miscellaneous outlays. I did pull out the $75,000 for the roofing and the $80,000 for the utility mapping. The difference of that is the $155,000. So there's computer equipment. You see the list there under capital outlays. So all of those items make up the $155,000.
Okay. And then the other question I had, Mr. Mayor, is that a rate study, is the rate study just to see if, and I know the answer to the question, but to see if we're competitive with everybody else, or is it to make sure that we're realizing all the revenue that we can from the electrical department?
A rate study is important to identify what revenue is required to achieve a plan, not only account for inflation and expenses that we see every year, but to cover a capital improvement plan, such as was submitted with the budget. Part of that is, of course, looking at other communities to make sure that we're, being competitive with our rates. But I think the driving force of a rate study is to make sure that we can achieve a plan at the lowest cost possible to the ratepayers.
Yeah. Thank you.
Any other questions? I have one. Carl could probably answer this. So the Scow Bay Pole Yard, $50,000 expense. So are we going to evacuate, or whatever you'd call it, or just not use the one on 14th Street anymore? Is that the plan?
Eventually, that is the plan, to move everything out of that 14th Street area out to, and just consolidate, all our supplies and storage in one area. The shed roof that we are proposing will get some of our wire spools out of the weather. Some of the other equipment that's out in the rain right now would be undercover, and it'll just last longer, be ready for service when when the time comes to use it.
Okay, I guess another part of the question for that particular item would be, so that would leave that property on 14th Street vacant then?
Yes, we would not have any power and light equipment or storage there.
Okay, thank you.
But there are other uses, other departments I know would like to use that area for different things. So
It'd just be nice to know if that's available, if this stays in the budget. So, all right, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the Water Enterprise Fund, as you can see, most of their revenues is from commercial and residential sales of water. You'll notice the Economic Fund transfer money. That is for the retirement of Cabin Creek and Scow Bay loan payments. In 1999, the voters approved the ballot proposition authorizing the city to budget up to $165,000 a year of the Economic Fund for debt retirement in regard to Cabin Creek and Scow Bay debt service. The Cabin Creek loan will be paid off in 2021, and the Scow Bay loan will be paid off in 2024. So then that Economic Fund transfer will be no longer. There is not a rate increase planned for the water utility yet, but there is, the budget does include a rate study. Capital projects for the water fund, a water storage tank piping improvements of $25,000, and Fram Street water main replacement, $200,000. And that project can be found on page 79. Any questions?
Don't see any.
Wastewater Enterprise Fund, it's found on page 37 of your budget. Most of the revenues, obviously, are the residential sales. There's no rate increase in this fund either, but there is a rate study planned. And as you are aware, the Wastewater Fund has recently done many pump station projects and are continuing to maintain and upgrade the pump stations as time and funding allows. They have a lot of projects going on, and pump stations, those projects are really expensive. So, the ones that we have done, they did a rate study, 7 or 8 years ago, and planned for rate increases, which the last rate increase was this last year. And so it's time again, as more projects come to the surface. So some of their projects are municipal building sewer service, Casino Street sewer replacement, Scow Bay 1 pump station rehab, and pump station 4 force main.
Jody, do we have the money on hand in the fund for those projects?
The Scow Bay 1 pump station project is being paid with an ADEC loan, and the pump station 4 force main one is also. And Casino Street is also, actually.
Yes.
And so, no. And the ADC loans are a 1.5% interest rate. So hopefully the state keeps doing those because it's the best loan you can get, right? I mean, it's better than issuing government bonds. It's great. So it's really helpful.
So we have to apply for these loans yet to go?
We do. And actually the voters do too. So, and they have in the past, and they might have to again soon in the future for more projects.
These loans are actually in place.
Yes,
already.
these 3 loans are in place already. We report on them monthly, so.
Any
more
other questions on this?
Well, if I may, Carl, you might explain, just for everybody's benefit, the process that the community went through on voting, and then you queued up the projects.
Are you talking about the large vote in the past?
Yes. Going back in history a little bit.
Right. Yes, when the community was looking at some substantial projects out in Scow Bay, expansion of the water and sewer system out in that direction, there was a public vote that allowed for, I want to say, 25 million?
Yeah, I think it was up to 25.
$25 million in expenses towards the water and sewer systems moving forward in time, and we're still actually working through or with that limit towards getting some of this work done. So it's an old process, but it's still valid, and the community did approve incurring debt for these projects.
Thanks.
Thanks, Carl.
Anything else? Nope. The Sanitation Fund is found on page 39. Most of their revenue comes from refuse collection and 25%, 26% Baylor landfill charges. The expenses mainly are from services and charges. Those are from motor pool vehicle replacement, reserves, O&M. I mean, their garbage trucks, all of that costs a lot of money to purchase and keep maintained. There is not a rate increase in this budget right now either, but they'll be doing a rate study as well. And are you going to be combining all of those rate studies with one vendor, or?
I believe water, wastewater, and sanitation will be the same consultant, and then probably electric will be someone else.
It could be. I'll be asking the consultant that we've identified for the water, wastewater, and sanitation if they're familiar with electric rate studies, and if they are, we might give them a shot. But the consultant that Power and Light hired the last time did a pretty good job, I thought, in looking at the rate study. So it'd be worthwhile going back to them, since they already know our system and our department.
Their one capital project is the solid waste baler replacement, which is a large project, and it's currently out for RFP, and I believe the proposals on that project are due back tomorrow. And then a recommendation will go to the Assembly in May if all goes according to plan. Harbor and Port, page 41. Most of their revenues come from mortgage fees. 19% comes from fisheries tax, 9% from transient fees there. There was a rate increase in the Harbor Department on last July 1st, and it was between 9 and 12%. I think it varied from what it was. In this proposed budget, the general fund will retain $350,000 of fish tax, which is about $50,000 higher than the general fund retained in this current year. And then the harbor is also budgeting to retain $350,000. It is up to the Assembly what to do with the fish tax and how to allocate it. But usually what's been happening is the general fund will say, we need $350,000, and the remainder of whatever we get, because we don't know what we're going to get each year, goes to the harbor. And I have a slide on the fish tax later on in this presentation, so we could go more into that. The fish tax could change with the state's final budget, and whether they decide to keep all of the fish tax funding instead of allocating half of it back to us.
Member Mucci?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can we go back to that slide about the harbors, please? So, the liveaboard for $14,000, what does that mean? Does that mean, it's like rent?
It's just their fee, the people that live on their boat, that's what they pay for the harbor because they have a lot of trash and, you know, they use the dumpsters at the harbor and, what else? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, it's their domicile, so we end up incurring, you know, everything from calls to the police, a little bit more, to more garbage, to domestic issues and animals and all sorts of things.
Getting their mail.
Getting their mail, yeah, they're a little bit.
And so if the fisheries tax goes away, if the governor wants it, so does that mean that's $350,000 that we'll have to sort out how to pay?
Currently, what we use most of that money for is saving for larger projects. So right now, we have roughly $3 million in our savings. That has come largely from the raw fish tax.
Yep.
And so that's what we tend to do with it. There are projects ongoing each year in the harbor, and so we take some of that savings money to do those projects. And so, yeah, it would be eventually, if we wanted to maintain the harbor and put away enough money to be able to, say, go after one of the municipal harbor match grants at $5 million or something like that, yeah, we probably would have to look at other revenues and raising rates.
Thank you.
Any other questions on the harbor budget?
Yeah, go along with that then, go. Yeah, the money is available right now, back on your spreadsheet for 2020, if I can find it real quick. To pay you have the money on hand to pay the Army Corps match of $2.2 million, is what I'm understanding from it. And go back to Member Mucci's question then we don't, from that point on, then we're almost zeroed out our account.
We'd have roughly $800,000 in our savings account because we have $3 million right now. So if you take 2.2 away. Though we have ongoing projects, and so, if you look at this year, we're going to do, a number of things, and those all come out of, it's like you're running your own business. It's like running your household. You take it out of your savings, and you use it, and you hope to replenish that savings account.
Okay, thank you.
So what's the minimum balance required by code for don't we have a code? You have to read 6 months, 3 months, whatever it is. What's the dollar value the harbor is supposed to maintain?
The general fund has a policy, but there hasn't been an official one set for the enterprise funds. But, for the electric fund, it will be much larger than one of the smaller funds, just because if something happens, it's probably going to cost a lot of money in electrical.
What have we been using in the budget policy document as the fund balance policy?
I think it was working capital, and it seemed like everyone was looking pretty good except for 4 months. Target baseline, operating expenses 4 months, and elderly housing 6 months, and assisted living 2 months.
Okay. Member Stan Gregory, you have a question?
No, just a clarifier and for Jody and/or the manager. That's not a part of code. That's just a guideline for us to work with, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks.
Correct. Yeah. That is set by the Assembly.
Oh, I recall.
And their recommendations coming from Jody and I.
Yep, thanks.
May I add something? One of the big challenges if we lose raw fish tax, and we'll talk about it when we get to the general fund, particularly in the harbor, it likely means that a big project like what Glo was talking about, so, we need to redo the South Harbor. We're probably going to have to bond that. So we'd have to go with revenue bonds. Again, the loss of the raw fish tax hurts big. I mean, that's, as Glo said, that's our capital project fund. And if that disappears out of the harbor, she probably can't raise rates big enough or fast enough to raise the money to do those kind of big projects in the future. So we're likely looking at long-term bonding to be able to do a project like that.
Yeah, thank you. Any other questions? Okay, Jody, please.
So, yep, on page 41, you'll see capital outlays for the harbor, including the Petro land trade of $120,000 budgeted, South Harbor fire shed, anode installation in the Middle Harbor, ongoing harbor dredge study that we're just finishing up here pretty soon, electric pedestals at the end of Sea Float, and South Harbor float maintenance. Debt service, they are almost done with their debt service. They pay about $115,000 bond payment a year, and the last one will be in 2021, so it's coming up pretty soon. And so that will leave $115,000 free of their money to use on other things like capital projects.
That's right.
Member Mucci?
Nope.
It's, I've had several people ask me about, is there a way to put either on the borough's website or on the utility bill to let folks at home know what we have due in bonds and when our loans are due? People are kind of, they want to know what we have out there and stuff, and I think it might be easy to do. We could either do it on probably the borough's webpage would probably be the easiest, but
Yeah, no problem.
that would be helpful.
Okay, elderly housing. On page 43 of the budget, there's a wait list for the facility. Rates will increase in June a little bit. The rates are set by HUD. Elderly housing is for low-income seniors over the age of 62 or the disabled. HUD covers approximately 70% of the resident's housing, and the remaining 30% is paid for by the resident. They have a few capital projects, annual window replacement. Sheila always tries to, that facility is getting pretty old, the building's aging, this is the older side of the facility. She replaces a few windows every year. You almost done? Five windows every year? Got to be almost done. Okay. And then just, wear and tear of carpet and vinyl and everything else that happens when people are living in the facility. Assisted living. The rent is 17% of revenue. Private pay services, 24%. Medicaid services, 36%. The property tax levied for the assisted living facility is $176,000 a year. This bond will mature in 2024, so 5 years. Assisted living is for individuals over the age of 55. There are 20 units total. It obviously has to be staffed 24/7, so, excuse me, so their salaries and benefits are their largest expenses, 65% of their budget. So any change in payroll or health care costs that happen are going to have a really big impact on this facility. The borough manager and director have been evaluating companies to do some type of consulting work for the facility and to perhaps find more efficiencies that the borough could take advantage of to decrease costs. And I think that's going to come before you in May to look at.
Excuse me, Jody, what year was that bond paid off? 2024?
Correct.
Yeah, fiscal year 2020.
Thank you.
I think it's actually December of 2023, but that's fiscal year 2020.
And just as Jody said it, but this assisted living is actually our largest department by staff numbers. Police department second, but we have more staff at assisted living than we do any other department. Just some idea. So as she said, changes in healthcare costs and benefits have a dramatic effect on that operation.
Any questions? Motor pools, down on page 48. There's 2 vehicles recommended for replacement, a public works truck and a motor pool flatbed pickup. 12 units were recommended for extension. There's more information on the motor pool vehicle replacement and extensions on the last page, page 83, that talks about the vehicles a little bit more. And you can always go and ask Chris as well. Any questions?
Member Nucci?
Yep, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So anytime the borough buys a piece of equipment like a truck or something, so that final say comes to the assembly? Is that true?
In the budget, and then,
Would you?
yeah, go ahead.
Not currently.
Okay.
So basically what happens is we present it as part of the budget.
Okay.
You approve the budget, and we then say, okay, this is now part of the motor pool fund. Now, when we get to the point of, ordering the vehicle, we generally go ahead and do that upon basically the assembly has approved the budget.
Okay.
Really big ones, we tend to bring back to the assembly. So,
Yep.
for example, an ambulance that is a couple $100,000, if we did a fire truck or a sanitation truck, we're going to bring those back just because they're huge expenses, and the public and the assembly need to hear that. Generally, I wouldn't bring either of these two trucks back to the assembly.
Okay.
We could. I mean, that's a decision by the assembly.
Sure.
Unless it's maybe, more expensive than what we budgeted
Right.
for.
Yeah, exactly. If it comes in more than what we budgeted, then we would have to bring that back.
Thank you.
I've got a question. When these vehicles are retired then from the fleet, they're generally auctioned off?
Yes.
Oops. Okay, so I haven't done a slide like this before. I thought it was...
Excuse me, Jody. Member Walter?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Chris, what do you guys got right now in your savings for these vehicle replacement funds, just so that the public knows?
For his department or for the whole motor pool?
For the motor pool. Yeah, or his department too, doesn't matter.
4 million.
Yeah.
4 million, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, just so that everybody knows that this money's already been saved, and so.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
So I thought this was an interesting slide. This is how many full-time equivalent employees we have at the borough in each department. This is what we've budgeted, proposed budget, that we don't necessarily have that. Like, for instance, the IT department, we have budgeted for half a part-time person, but we've had that in the budget for like 3 years, and we haven't filled it. We've been contracting it out. Parks and Rec isn't fully staffed. They definitely don't have 10.82 employees. I just thought this was interesting. Like Steve said earlier, there's almost 17 employees with assisted living. This includes department heads. Obviously it's not 16 and then a part-time person. It's, multiple part-time people, added together, their hours added together. So does anyone have any questions on this? I just thought it was interesting. A lot of departments share, like there's an administrative assistant at the Public Works, 2 of them actually, and they're shared between departments. The water department might pay a third of that person, the wastewater will pay a third, Public Works will pay a third. They're shared, so that's interesting. And like my department, a lot of the enterprise funds pay for a lot of my staff because I do the utility billing here. I pay all of their bills in accounts payable. We do all of their payroll, and so a lot of their funding so that's included in overhead that they pay the general fund every year and kind of grumble about, but anyway.
Happy to
So.
do that.
Member Mitchell?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So can we walk across this, the admin, that's the city manager, clerk?
Debbie and Danielle.
Okay. Finance?
That's me, the front desk clerk, take payments, answer phones, sales tax, AP, property tax, payroll, grants, banking.
Utility billing.
Yeah, did I say that? Utility billing. And then, a lot of the employees have multiple hats. IT, we don't have funded.
Sure.
Did you want to go through all of them?
Yep. Yes, please.
Okay, I might need some help then. Police and jail have 14 people. I'm not sure exactly how many are dispatchers and how many are police officers.
We currently have 5 dispatchers, and we have 8 officers and 1 open sergeant position.
Yep.
Oh.
Sandy?
Myself, the fire EMS director, and Ryan is the fire marshal and the proposed EMS coordinator / firefighter.
So we all understand in the public, if anybody's listening to the meeting, that 3 is, just like we said, that's in this proposed budget, is for the new EMS position, so that's, otherwise it would be 2, correct? Ryan and Sandy?
Yes, sir.
Taylor?
I guess, so in this proposed budget, we would be hiring out that position, or it's just going?
The budget you have in front of you at this point includes filling the sergeant position and the EMS coordinator position and a part-time IT person. They're not currently filled, and that's one of those things, decisions that have to be made as you go through the budget process, whether they stay in the budget or removed or how that's handled.
Okay.
But the current budget you have includes those positions. We have Public Works, that includes Chris, streets crew.
We have a question here, so Nobumichi?
I was just curious if we just work our way across the stuff, just so everybody has an understanding of how many people are working in what department. I mean, I see Public Works is 7.33, and I understand people are kind of filling in but I think it's just good to understand how many people we have working in each department.
I believe the manager just called on Chris to talk.
Chris, go ahead and speak to your 7 point and a third.
So in Public Works, what's represented there, we have 5 full-time members of the streets crew, plus 1 position that is split streets and building maintenance for a total of 6. Then we have portions of our 2 admin assistants, which makes up another position, and then the .33 is would be my 1/3 of my salary and benefits that are paid by the Public Works Department.
Any questions about the Public Works staffing? Yes, that would bring us to...
So the 3 would be myself, a full-time building official who's full-time, a part-time mapping person, and a quarter-time admin person that we share with Public Works and Sanitation and wastewater and everybody else.
Many hats, it sounds like. And then that would bring us to the library of 4.05.
So for the library, we have myself, full-time. We have a full-time program coordinator. We have a 3/4-time library technician. We have 3 library clerks that work 12 hours a week, and we have 2 high school shelvers that work 6 hours a week.
Okay, thank you. And Parks and Rec, 10.82.
So there's myself, Jesse, who does the groundskeeping and the cemetery, Cody, who's our full-time facility maintenance staff member, the facility supervisor, 2 facility specialists that do the front desk position, and then a 3rd one that's unfilled currently. 10 lifeguard positions that can work anywhere from 7 to 10 hours a week. 7 of them are unfilled currently. And a 10-hour janitor position, as well as a full-time program coordinator position. So.
Okay, thank you. Any questions from the Assembly? Okay, thank you.
You want to go through the enterprise funds?
Sure.
Okay, well, the electric, water, and wastewater department split the utility director's salary And in the electric department, we have an office manager and a customer service representative in the office, 2 journeyman linemen, 1 apprentice lineman, a meter reader, also does groundman work and our mapping when we need it. And we have a mechanic that takes care of the power plant and an electrician. In the water and wastewater department, there are 2 operators at each plant, full-time, and there's 1 operator that works at splits time between the 2 departments. And we also fund a portion of the administrative assistance at Public Works with our budgets.
Just one question on that. So the wastewater and the water, so there's like 2 full-time employees, and you split admin work 50-50 with that, so it's actually 2.5, or?
And then there's also a third of Carl's time and 25% of Derek O'Soup's time as admin assistant.
Yeah, does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
That brings us up to sanitation, I believe.
Yeah, so somebody's going to have to help me out because my eyes are getting old here. Is that
4.5.
4.5. Okay, so we may be a little off on that number, but what we have is 4 full-time crewmen at the baler that do collections and staff the baler. And then we have a portion of 1 admin assistant that is dedicated to sanitation, and then we also have 1/3 of my position is funded by sanitation department.
Okay, thank you. And any questions about sanitation? No? Harbor Department, 7 1/4?
Yeah, 7 1/4. So we are 24/7 year-round, and Eddie and I cover 6 of the days. And then I have 1.5 guys working maintenance, Ben Hind and Jake Slavis. And then I have 3.5 guys that do the shift work, so that it covers our 24-hour-a-day coverage. And then we have 2 months that we pick up Jim Engel in the summertime to help cover. There's just not enough of us to go around when we have a lot of activity.
Thank you. Any questions about the harbor staffing? Okay, that brings us to elderly housing, and there's 2.
For elderly housing, I have an administrative assistant and a maintenance guy that they work at both ends. And then myself, I'm also split between those 2. So out of those 2 employees, I guess it would be myself, the maintenance guy, administrative assistant, however, broke up. And then assisted living, I have a full-time cook, a full-time RN, a fill-in RN that's not filled right now. I have a full-time resident assistant supervisor and a full-time activity coordinator, and then 8 full-time employees, and then the rest are fill-in, PRN. So there's a total of about, I think, 23 right now positions, with including the fill-in people who we rely heavily on during vacations or sickness or whatever it may be. Does that make sense?
Thank you. Any questions on elderly housing or assisted living staff? Okay, I've seen on the motor pool, 2.3.
So that would be 2 full-time mechanics and then 1/3 of my position.
Yep, thank you.
Any more questions? Okay, we're going to move on to the general fund. The picture was just cute, so I...
Trying to lighten things up a little bit.
Were there any more questions about the enterprise fund before we move on to the general fund?
I don't see any hands going up, so.
Okay, so the general fund is balanced, but it is slightly higher than it was for this current year, and so that's a concern. Here's the general fund expenses over 10 years. The general fund operating expenses are in blue, local contribution to the schools in orange. The gray portion is transfers out, which mainly are comprised of Fisheries Business Tax. And initially we put all of the Fisheries tax in the general fund, and then we transfer out a portion to the harbor. So that's what that is, and also assisted living subsidy. The 2015 and 16 were a little bit higher there. Those were transfers out for the Municipal Building Capital Project Fund.
So I have a question.
Okay, Member Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So, just on your first couple of statements, I mean, why is that a concern to you that the budget is higher than last year?
Well, it's a concern just because we're so unsure about the state's budget. We're worried about our flexibility. We've had to use more property tax to balance this budget. And so that, we have a cap of 10 mils, and so we're almost to that cap. So we're going to have to figure out some other ways to balance this budget. Usually we use property tax as, the final number to balance, and we won't be able to do that soon.
And if I may jump in as well, Jody and the department heads have done an absolutely fantastic job these last, 4 or 5 years, where we find cuts to make up for the increase in insurance and, costs, wages with union contracts, or, the cost of a pencil. I mean, I'm being silly, but there are inflationary issues that hit these budgets pretty hard, So as that stuff goes up and we have no control over, we have to find ways to cut things to keep that budget down. And we've done a really good job of that, of trying to make that happen. We're now getting to that point where our flexibility is going away, because as Jody said, we're getting to the cap. Health insurance continues to go up double digits every year. And, we know in the contracts we have, we've been warned that we've been kind of lowballing them for a while, and that's going to come into play probably with the next contracts. And we're not going to have a whole lot of flexibility to deal with that. So, yes, we are concerned. To balance this budget this year, we took the contingency out. We moved some money around into the Property Development Fund. That's what it's there for. But, we're not going to be able to do those things every year going forward. I say that well?
I think there's a difference between I know we have a balance, excuse me, Mr. Mayor, but I know we have a balanced budget before us, and I think it's different than what I envisioned, and, it's just me personally, but I think we need to be looking at a reduced budget, and we need to figure out how to get there, as a group. This is great that we're talking about a balanced budget, but I don't think that's the direction I want to go, and I hope we can have that conversation this evening before we
Understood.
Okay, any other
go ahead.
discussion on this? Steve, I have one question, since it just popped in my mind about revenue that we were worried about. Did you find out if that is confirmed to secure rural schools?
I'm trying. We got the letter that Secure Rural Schools has been re-upped for last year, so a payment for this year. It's not on NACO's website. I can't find any press releases about it other than what the senator's aide sent to us. So I'm not exactly sure why that's the case. I went out to the Forest Service's website, I went out to NACO's website, and there's just no press on it right now. So hopefully they're just a little behind, and we'll see something in the next day or two that outlines all the things, but I haven't found it yet.
Okay, I'm sorry to interject that, but
no, it's okay. But it's I'm sure it's just that we were getting a heads up that it's done, and the agencies and stuff have not yet posted what they're going to put out there. So hopefully in the next day or so we'll get confirmation.
Hopefully it's a reality. All right, thanks. Sorry.
Yes, sir.
So the general fund's fund balance policy is to retain unassigned reserves between 4 and 6 months, which is pretty conservative. GFOA says their policy, they're the Government Finance Officers Association recommends between 2 and 4 months of expenses. So ours is a little bit higher. We fall within that range. We're going into fiscal year 2019. We had an unassigned fund balance of $3.6 million. So where the money comes from. Yeah.
It's a clarifying point. Was that like 4 or 5 years ago that we made that shift to the 4 to 6 months? Do you guys remember when we did that?
You know,
I remember his Haverlick was one who brought it up when he was on the assembly.
the policy's been in place for quite some time. I would say eight or so years.
No, I was on the assembly when it changed.
Really?
Yeah. Doesn't really matter. I'm just curious to like somewhere around that ballpark 4 or 5.
I've been here 8 years, and I think we put it in within a couple of years of me being here. So, 6 years, give or take, maybe. And we've refined it. I think, Jody, we moved based on what our auditor's was talking to a working capital model rather than just a pure fund balance.
More for the enterprise funds, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
I mean, it's a great guideline. I know we break from that when we need to, and some departments can't always meet it, but I'm glad we've got it right now. Thanks.
Member Walhooter has a question.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Hey, Jody, I noticed here that in 2018 we had 4.9 months set aside. What's it looking like for 2019 in the budget?
Well, I would say,
4?
I have to get back to you. No, it's probably, I would say five months.
Good.
Yeah.
I thought it was going to start trending down. That's what
No, I think we're looking pretty good after looking at the last financials that I handed out to you guys. It was 75% of the year, and the general fund was looking pretty good. It's hard because we get that PILT payment in June, and so it doesn't look, I have to mentally add that money back in because it's, a big chunk of changes over $600,000, so it kind of skews things until we get that.
Good news.
Yeah.
And question for the manager, maybe if I didn't recall this right, but our discussion with the congressman, didn't he say PILT was looking like it was going to...
Yeah, Congressman Young seemed to feel that PILT was in good shape.
Yeah, okay, so that's just to boost people's spirits a little bit.
So 67% of the general fund is supported by local taxes, the majority of it being sales tax and property taxes. The other taxes, the 3%, most of that is the tobacco tax. And 13% of the state funding, that's the fisheries tax, community revenue sharing, state PERS relief, and jail contract money. The 11% federal funding is the PELT payment and the grant for the CCAD officer. And then the 2%, just so you are aware, it's mainly the parks and recreation fees and ambulance fees.
Member Lynn?
Question. Is there anything else, I'm still back calling revenue sharing. On the Senate side, have we heard any more that would be cut, stay the same? Do you have any feel?
I can speak to what I've heard. I don't know. There's a long way to go. Revenue sharing, I think, is okay for the moment, although the governor always, in Alaska has the power of vetoing any appropriation. So even though that has not been discussed, I suppose the governor could zero that out if he chose to. We have not heard that, so we're assuming we're getting it. Raw fish tax for the borough, specifically on a cash basis, raw fish tax is currently our biggest concern because it's a cash payment, and there's, clearly the governor had his eye on it as far as taking all of that and keeping it at the state level. So, I mean, that's the big number right now. I'm sure there's going to be little things. I think Sandy's dealing with the LEPC grant that we get. Looks like that's going to go away. We may see, we've talked a little bit about it in my report. The funding for Greens, Ernie Haugen public use area looks like that's gone after, 2019. So there's stuff like that out there. But again, the big one is going to be whether we get raw fish tax or not.
And the PERS funding stayed okay all the way.
For now, it's staying the same, yes.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, so where the money goes, as you can see, the top 4 expenses for the general fund are public safety, and then the school, and then the streets, and then Parks and Rec. Does anyone have any questions about this slide? Kind of puts things in perspective of where all the money from the general fund is spent. This is just a different perspective of the general fund expenses by type instead of by department. So half of the expenses are for payroll, 19% for the school. Service and charges, 19% also. On pages 19 and 20 of the budget, you'll see the Borough Assembly, admin, attorney, information systems, and finance. If you just look at those all as a whole, this current year we're spending $1,434,000. Next year it's proposed the total is $1,431,620. Does anyone have any questions about this slide?
I don't see any, Jody.
Okay. Public safety, police, CCAD, jail, fire department. The increases in both of these departments are due to, the police shows an increase of $62,000. A portion of this is due to having to upgrade a lot of computers from Windows 2007 to 2010, taser replacements, equipment testing, FTO course, field training officer course, and increased one-time equipment costs. I was also informed by Jim yesterday that there was a miscalculation in his budget, so he has $8,000 that he doesn't need, so he said so for that first reading in May, the budget, it'll be about $8,000 lower in the general fund because of that error, so that's good. Fire department, there was an increase of $84,000. It's due to adding an additional full-time position. Any questions on this slide?
Don't see any.
Public safety, police and fire, the positions in the police and fire department proposed budget that are currently not filled. The police sergeant position, that's in this current budget as well. It's not a new position for next year. The fire department, EMS coordinator, firefighter is a new position for next year. That would make 3 full-time positions there. It's interesting to learn, I don't know how many people know this, but the ambulance calls have doubled since the 80s, which is interesting. And yeah, it sounds like there's just a lot of more need for it. I don't know, Sandy, if you want to talk about it at all tonight, or wait for questions.
I can just wait for questions.
Sorry, I put you on the spot. Does anyone have any questions about this? Yes.
Member Mucci?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So let's say that we do fund the police sergeant's position. Does that mean that this overtime cost is going to kind of go away? You know, right now we're looking at a fiscal year cost of $132,000. Is that number going to go away, or will that be significantly reduced? That's what I'm trying to sort out.
It will be significantly reduced. And one of the increases in our budget is due to the small tools and supplies, and that's because we've been having to make internal cuts and we haven't been able to replace stuff over the past couple of years like we should be because of all the overtime cost of the turnover. And now, since we have a stable department, we're trying to get this position filled so we're fully staffed to cut down on overtime costs. And if you looked at the times when we were fully staffed, our overtime costs were actually below what was budgeted during that time. So, I mean, you would be looking at tens of thousands of dollars less in overtime expenses for the police department.
Member Stenberger?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I spoke this a little bit on the radio the other day, but if it was okay if I put you on the spot?
Sure, no, it's okay.
You bet. So, and I know this is only the special meeting to talk about this. For those listening at home, the budget, I mean, it's a 6-week process. We're going to be talking about this for 3 full readings of the budget. But for the sake of argument, let's say we pass it as is with the police sergeant and the EMS coordinator. Is that a positions you're planning on filling right away, or are you planning on waiting to see kind of what comes down from the state in terms of the hack fest that Governor Dunleavy is proposing?
That's the big question of the day. clearly Jim would like to start taking advantage of lower overtime right away. That means filling it right away, and I'm sure Sandy feels the same way about the EMS coordinator position. What if we do that and we fill it in a month and a half, and we don't get raw fish tax?
Well, I'm on the same page with you. That's more like what your vision was, given the uncertainty.
And it's a question for the community. It's a question for, that Jody and I are dwelling on. It's a question the Assembly should be thinking about. Because you lose $350,000 in the general fund, where are we going to find it? Now, granted, we could take it out of reserves for a year and let other turnover happen and try to adjust for that. But it is a concern. I mean, those are two pretty important positions. Likely, in both cases, you're going to bring somebody in, potentially off the island, so you don't particularly want to fill them and then have to lay somebody off. That's just not great business.
So I should clarify my position on that for those who haven't heard me say it is, I definitely would be much more in favor. I have no problem approving it. I agree with everything both Sandy and Jim said. These are needed things. That said, though, if we were going to be really that brutalized by the state budget, the very same thing you said, that's bad business to bring somebody in under false pretenses of uncertainty. In short, I would hope admin would be move patiently with those hires, is all I'm saying.
Well, and this is the challenge that I'll say, I'll take it on me. It's my challenge.
Indeed.
But Assemblymember Mucci just said he wants a lower budget. I don't know what four of you want, is what it comes down to. So, for example, we could fill these positions, and if raw fish tax doesn't come in, we can fund the $350,000 deficit by taking it out of our general fund reserves, and that could be our budget. There's no law that says the budget has to be balanced. So, is the Assembly okay with that? You don't have to answer that, but
I'm gonna.
That's, or is the better answer to wait until we know? And I'm not sure there's a right or wrong answer to that. It's kind of a philosophy question, I guess. My concern is I don't want to fill them and then be asked by the Assembly to lay somebody off. I think that's just not a great way to do business.
Agreed. Thanks, Steve. I didn't mean to get too far in the weeds here this early, but I thought it was prudent.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. For me, these are like the number 1 and 2 priorities for the community. I've been to, as an EMT, I've been to many calls where we were called out to stuff, and the police were there first. They made sure the scene was safe. They made sure that we were walking into a safe environment to do our work. I want these 2 positions filled, and I'm not concerned about, I know money's tight, but these 2 positions need to get filled, and if we need to cut somewhere else, I'm all for that. You might not think that you need a police sergeant or you need an EMS firefighter to show up at your door until you need them. And when they're late getting to your house, you're going to be all honked off, and they're going to want to know why they didn't get there sooner. And it comes back to us about, we didn't think those 2 positions are the most important things on my priority. And I've said this for a long, for a while. These are my top 2 priorities here. I can deal with the library or the museum and Parks and Rec not being open as many hours, but these 2 things here, they go to the top 2 words up there, public safety. And if we're not dealing with public safety or making sure that the community is safe, we need to sort that out. If we don't want to have 24/7 police protection, then we need to have that conversation up here. And hopefully we can deal with that a little bit tonight. We'll see. But yeah, thank you.
Any other discussion about the public safety discussion going on? Okay, Jody, you want to proceed, please?
Public Works, streets found on page 23. The Public Works Department has increased 2% from the current year. Payroll, $681,000. Supplies, $138,000. And services and charges, $401,000. This budget eliminates snow removal outside Service Area 1. That is approximately, I believe, $8,000, I've heard. The biggest expenses are for this fund are their motor pool equipment. And again, their street graders and their dump trucks and their all their stuff. Public Works Director Cotta had budgeted $45,000 expense in this department to resurface a portion of Frederick Drive, but because of lack of available funds in the general fund, to get the general fund in balance, we moved that expense to the Roads Special Revenue Fund on page 56. So it's still in the budget. It is just in the Special Revenue Fund. This Special Revenue Fund only has about $80,000 in it. Chris would like to use this fund and would like to build up this fund. It's funded with Secure Rural Roads money. He'd like to build it up to have a larger balance to do paving projects in the community. But we don't know how much money we're going to get this year for Secure Rural Schools. So that's up in the air right now. But that's. And Chris, can you explain the resurfacing, what's needed, and why for that road?
Well, essentially, that road, Frederick Drive, is just in really poor condition, has been in really poor condition for a number of years. In a lot of places, the surfacing is pretty much gone, and so the big rock is coming through, and it makes it really hard for us to grade the road and keep the road in the kind of shape that it needs to be in to support traffic. I put some money in the budget just to basically do a short section every year for the next 5 years, and then we'd have it done. But we don't have the kind of money in our regular maintenance purchases of rock and things to do that kind of work. So it was an additional amount. I don't necessarily agree with the moving it to the timber receipts fund, just because, like you said, that's kind of where we get our paving money from. And we don't really have a strong funding mechanism for road replacement or road resurfacing right now, and that's kind of what we have reserved that SRS money for traditionally. So,
thanks.
If I may jump in, one of the things I've asked Chris to do, and he's right, I mean, he was not happy with my decision to move that money. I've asked Chris to do, I want a full road inventory, which takes a tremendous amount of time. Roads we own, roads we don't, what we're maintaining, condition of the roads, what the surface is. And, hopefully that leads to where we could get an idea of an estimate. Unfortunately, in this current funding environment, likely the only way we're going to fund big road projects, and that includes, bringing an asphalt plant in here, it's probably going to be going to the voters with a bond request and say, hey, if you want, pass a $5 million bond and we'll get somebody in here and do a whole bunch of road work. Short of that, it's going to be patchwork. And Chris is correct. If we start using the SRS road fund money, then we'll never have a balance big enough to be able to afford to bring an asphalt plant here, because the mobilization cost alone will eat up a big part of that. So it becomes this trade-off. Again, because we don't have a funding mechanism for roads, how do we have enough money to do something like what, I don't know if everybody heard what Chris said, 45,000 is what, a half a mile maybe?
Yeah, that's the materials cost for about a half mile stretch.
So we're probably looking at 5-8 years of $45,000 each year to be able to finish that road. But by the time you finish it, you're probably going to have to start over again. And that's not doing any other major road work in town. So that's kind of what we're facing. So, did I hit it well enough?
Yeah, I think so.
Member Mucci, you have a...
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So it's kind of like a two-part question, but so eliminating the snow removal outside service area 1, what does that mean? Is that the road, the roads off Papke's, or?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
It is the side roads off of Cappies Road. We will stop doing snow removal there, and the primary reason for we're looking for money, but the primary reason to do that is to actually free up one of his public works staff that we are going to yank out of public works duties, and he's part-time maintenance right now. The plan is to do enough work on eliminating the snow removal piece to be able to have more maintenance time. Unfortunately, we got a problem there too. In the sense that the buildings are aging. Even buildings like the library, which are fairly new, are getting old enough with that much heavy use that things start to break, and we're not keeping up with that. So we need to free up some of that maintenance time instead of doing public works jobs to be able to do maintenance jobs without adding staff. And to do that, we have to give up something. So the snow removal is a piece of that.
Sure. And that's 2.4 miles, whatever it turns out to be.
Yeah.
And so the other part of the question is, so once you do your road inventory around town and sort out if the borough owns those roads or private or individuals own that road, then why, once we get to that, and when we get to the point of the inventory, why wouldn't we have those individuals pay to have their roads maintained and serviced?
May very well.
Okay.
Once that inventory is done, we want to bring that back to the assembly and say, this is what we found, and here's what we're currently doing. Here's the condition of the roads. Here's what we own. Here's what we don't own. And does the assembly want us to take the next step and say we're not going to do that anymore, or do you want us to keep doing it? Whatever that answer is. Some of the challenges, a lot of this stuff goes back in time. Meaning, the borough's been doing it. The city used to do it for a very long time. And we don't really want to take something away without talking about it very publicly. Says, hey, we've been doing this for 10 years. We're going to stop doing it, or we're considering stopping doing it. We want to give the public a chance to adjust to that and say, hey, wait a minute. Maybe there's another solution. But it starts with having that inventory done and knowing what we're doing and how much we're doing and how much we're spending and what the condition of these roads are in. So.
Member Lynn?
Yeah, on the SRS money, the percentages we can use on roads and for schools is the same. What I'm trying to remember.
In our policy, we said 15% for roads and then the remainder for schools.
But could we legally use more for roads?
Yes.
What percentage could we go to?
I believe they told me it was up to the borough how they wanted to allocate that between the two. Once we became a borough. When we were a city, they told us, hey, this is how much you get for schools, this is how much you get for roads. And I'll have to recheck, but I believe they said it's up to you to allocate how much for each.
Okay. My one other point is that we've been talking now about bonding on the electrical side, we've been talking about bonding on the wastewater. Now we're talking about bonding here on streets and stuff. There ain't no way that our taxpayers can afford this kind of a load. So in my mind, what we're going to have to do is, one is, for time being, we're going to have to decide which one's most important to bond on somewhere down the road. And second of all, then take a Band-Aid approach on some of this other, as I see it here. And that's maybe needs to be a decision made down the road here.
Well, and we have a hospital to possibly bond for.
Yes, good point.
Member Mucci?
Yeah, I don't want to get lost in the weeds here. I'm not concerned about bonding for this, that, and the other, but I think we need to identify what we're going to be taking care of.
Yeah.
If we don't know what we have or what we're taking care of, then we can't go out and sell it to the community. I mean, if we're doing stuff, if we're removing snow removal outside Service Area 1 just because we've been doing it for 10 years, I think people need to sort it out that we're not going to continue to do business the way we have done for the last 10 years. I mean, we just can't afford it. We just cannot afford it. We'll go out to a bond. I mean, we just saw that the community a year ago wanted to continue the sales tax exemption for folks in town. So we have to sort that kind of stuff out. So I'm not concerned about the bonding thing as opposed to sorting out what we have and what we need to take care of. And once we've sorted out what we have, what we need to take care of, then we can kind of sort out how we're going to take care of the roads that the city doesn't own and kind of sort that stuff out. So I think we'll get to a bonding thing at one time or another, but that's not like, for me, that's not number one on this budget work session. But yeah, no, I appreciate that. Yep, it's good.
Member Stanton Gregory had a comment?
No, sir.
That'll be an interesting discussion when we get to the road maintenance thing, or plowing, just snow plowing, and then trying to get people that have owned these roads and have had them plowed, and then to not plow it, and there's access when where they have garbage pickup, and it gets into a bigger can of worms. So anyway, that'll
It's a bigger issue, yes.
Yeah.
And that's why I don't want to arbitrarily do it, and shame on me, but it's why I wanted to take our time with looking at this. We want to look at subdivision order, make sure that what we think is true really is true, and that we don't, do something that we end up having to backtrack on. So it'll take Chris some time to do this.
Good to have the accurate information on quantities. Any other discussion on this point of the presentation? Okay, Jody.
Okay, community development. Their most significant expense is probably the professional services. That department pays for all the inspection costs for all the general fund borough buildings. Just gonna cruise through that one. Take up time. Community service organizations are found on page 25. You'll find the museum, KFSK, Mountain View Food Services. These community service organizations are being proposed to be funded out of the general fund. On page 58, you'll find the budget for the transient room tax fund, which has the Visitor Center Chamber of Commerce included in it as well as it was last year. As you can see, community service requests have been added to the proposed budget with a 10% reduction of what they are receiving in the current budget, not necessarily what they requested. Not on this slide is the city of Kupernoff, which is normally, it's also on page 25. We usually fund them a portion of a PILT payment, about $4,500, and that was cut from this year's budget.
Member Stanton Gregory?
Yeah, just since you, Steve, commented before, you're trying to know what four of us think and what it can pass like. In terms of the Kupernoff payment, I think that's something I'll probably argue against when it comes time to the three readings. Jody, what do they usually use that money for?
Kupernoff?
Yeah.
I think they're building up their fund balance for probably the dock.
Yeah,
But you thought to ask them. I'm not.
No, I'm sorry, I apologize. That was more rhetorical. I know they're trying to save money for that, and I think that's more community infrastructure stuff, and I know $4,000 isn't a ton of money for them or us, but I think it's been historically a good relationship maintainer, for lack of a better term. So anyway, in one of the readings, you'll hear me talk about that. Just food for thought.
Member Mucci?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So does that money come to us for Kupernoff? Does it come to us to kind of deal with, or has it been pass-through money in the past?
Before we became a borough, Kupernoff got this money direct. It was part of the PILT allocation that comes, and money's given directly to the state, who then allocates it out. And it's based a complicated formula. Bob might be able to explain it, but it has to do with number of federal acres you have and a few other things. So Kupernoff averaged about that $44,000, $4,500 a year direct through the PILT program. When we became a borough, that ceased because all the money goes to the borough. The borough elected to continue to pay it to Kupernoff, but instead of coming from the state, now it comes directly from Petersburg Borough. So there's no requirement to do that. It was just, as some member Stanton Greger said, kind of a trust building process, but there's no requirement for the borough to pass those funds on.
And the other question I have, Mr. Mayor. So when we're looking at these reduction in community service organization, when's a good time? Is it farther down the budget process for those folks to kind of give us the impacts that these are going to have, or what's the best time for folks to kind of let us know how these impacts are going to deal with their organization?
Well, I think it'll have to be one of the three readings that we're going to have on the schedule that's on page 5 or whatever it is, because tonight we're not accepting public comment. So they'll have 3 opportunities. And I believe if it's like any other ordinance, the second meeting will have a public hearing as well.
Yes, sir.
So. Any other questions on community service? Thank you, Jody.
Yep, library is on page 26. Kara already explained, excuse me, about their personnel. And also on page 67, the library capital project is there, thank you, for constructing a covered shelter with the remaining capital campaign donations. And her budget has remained very flat throughout the year. So. Parks and Rec. The reason for the increase of about $70,000 in operating expenses is for payroll. They have a number of capital outlays this year because of just the aging facility. You know, it's hit 15 years now. We actually budgeted for them in the Property Development Fund, and that'll be a slide that I'm going to show you next. Does anyone have any questions right now at all for Chandra about?
Any questions on this particular slide? Member Mucci?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So the budget is up, what, 80 grand or 70 grand? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's based on personnel?
Yeah.
Yep.
Primarily
We had
personnel.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
We had a 40,000, 30,000 increase in insurance costs for personnel. And then really taking a serious look at how many facility hours we currently have and how many facility man hours we've had budgeted for. We need 19,647 hours of facility coverage. We've been budgeted for 16,312. So we've been understaffed like in the budget process. So this is trying to actually meet the operating needs of the facility.
Member Mucci?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So understaffing, it just means that the facility is not going to be open as much, or you're not going to be able to do as much for the community? What does that mean? Yes?
That is an option. That is not currently in this budget to reduce hours.
Okay.
But that is clearly an option. We're doing something here in May because we have a maintenance period where we have to shut down and do major maintenance. But we're also shutting down early for 2 days, or shutting down for 2 days purely for staffing. We don't have the staff in place. And, to be honest with you, I don't want to pay the overtime. And it's burning out the staff we've got, having them try to cover hours over and over again that, it's just not working well. So we need a chance to try to get people hired and get the facility, get some of the things cleaned up that we need to do. But then down the road, Chandra and I will keep looking at it. The Assembly has wanted to weigh in on this at various times, so we have not made a decision permanently on what the hours of the facility should be.
Yeah. Thank you.
And we are having a hard time filling these positions.
Yeah, Chandra can speak to it, and Debbie can as well. It's, for a community that we think has a lot of people that need jobs, we have a real hard time getting people to apply for jobs that are qualified. I mean, and particularly at Parks and Rec, kind of like a couple of positions represented in the back there. We've got some pretty stringent rules. You're dealing with children or elders at Mountain View Manor, so the folks we hire have to meet certain background stuff, and we've been having a real tough time in that area. So,
thank you.
So I mentioned Parks and Rec's capital improvements. They need to new security cameras. Their pool control system is going out. It includes sand filter replacement, prominent reader board replacement. They need to replace the CO2 system. Chandra, do you mind just kind of elaborating on that a little bit?
Sure. The system is approximately 15 years old, and things are breaking down and need to be replaced. So our whole entire We've had intermittent shutdowns over the last 6 months because our pool system is just breaking. And we're trying to fix, and it would be cheaper to fix them and replace them than it would be to continue to keep limping them along.
Okay.
There's also $15,000 budgeted for the hospital emergency room doors. It's not the full cost of the doors, but it's a portion.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Member Mucci.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So what does that mean, emergency room doors?
May I speak to this?
Sure.
I know what they are, but I'm just trying to start out with.
What it is there's no outside door opener for if you're a handicapped person to get inside doors. That's to put outside access into those so that you can get, so somebody that's handicapped can go inside, or if you have somebody in a wheelchair can move around.
So are there
In or out.
ambulance
I'm
rolls
sorry.
in? So are there ambulance rolls in, that door?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Chad, am I correct? That's the aim? Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
So I just wanted to remind everyone, this is the fund that the marijuana tax goes into. So the marijuana tax revenue is about $45,000 a year and goes into this fund. So it's one of the ways to build this fund's balance, that and selling property. Items not in the proposed budget that may need to be revisited. The state of Alaska changes to the school, jail bond reimbursement, fisheries business tax, education funding, when we know more about employee health insurance premiums. Just going to touch on a few of those really quickly. So this is next year's annual bond payments. The area in blue are the amounts that are paid for by the property taxes. The amount in orange is paid by the state of Alaska normally. So the state reimbursement for 2020 would be $469,000. The governor had cut that out of the budget entirely. The House has put 50% back in. Since property tax bills go out on July 1st, we have a little bit of a dilemma. Do we charge taxpayers 50% of that bond amount that we might need to cover? Do we charge them the whole amount? So that's something to talk about. That's not in this budget. I'm just going to, as you can see, I just want to point out really quick before I go to the next slide, which is part of this. The Aquatic Center, the first bond matures in 2021, so that's going to go away pretty soon. So the maturity dates are on the top, so the end's in sight. I point that out too, because there's a lot of communities that have just issued bonds, that have 20 years left that I have no idea what they're going to do in their communities. So it doesn't seem like we're that lucky, but we are kind of lucky that the end is in sight. So tax on, per our charter, the tax on real property shall not exceed 10 mils except tax on real property necessary to retire debt approved by the voters is excluded from this limit. So if we went with the proposed fiscal year 2020 budget and we added all of the 100% of the school bond payments in the state's portion, it would raise the service area of 1 mill rate to 13.54 mils approximate. So, and just the, so that's about, it's about 1.7 mils. So it's significant. So there's something, I'm hoping to find out more. We're hoping to learn more, see what develops in the next few weeks before the next couple of readings, because we might suggest changing the budget to include a portion of the property taxes for the bond reimbursement. Sorry.
What is the total debt, Jody? You might have said, I might have missed it, that we owe in bonds for the school?
Well, for the school projects that we have outstanding still, yes, with interest, I believe it's $3.5 million. I did not say that.
Wow. Okay.
The Fisheries Business Tax, this is just a sheet of what we've done in past years. When we first started getting it, the general fund kept all of it, and then we slowly started giving more and more to the harbor. The reason for this was, they had a North Harbor to replace, capital improvements to do, and the general fund wasn't reliant on all of it, and so we were able to do that. So that was just so you could see the split. School funding, $1.4 million state cut. Forward funding could push us into fiscal year 2021. Currently are budgeting $1.8 million for the school. Solutions to help supplement the school if cuts are made. Secure Rural Schools funding balance is at $3.8 million. The borough has been using $400,000 of the Secure Rural Schools funds annually to support the school. The other $1.4 million has been from property taxes in the last few years. Could also use some Fisheries Business Tax possibly, if we get it. So it just some ideas to think about when we're looking at the budget. Budget concerns, there isn't any contingency budgeted in the general fund. We normally budget about 1% for contingency and unforeseen items. We usually spend less than half of that, but there's a zero amount for the contingency in the general fund right now. The budget results in an increase to the property tax levy. The property tax levy has been increased in the general fund budget due to an increase in expenses. The increase is $120,000, which will be an increase of about 0.4 mils. Limited streets and roads funding is on page 56. You can find that what we talked about with road resurfacing on Frederick Point. The current balance of that fund is $81,000, and we need that funding for other purposes as well. So, and then the increased cost of employee health insurance. Just to go off of what Kendra said earlier, if someone changes their health insurance from just covering themselves to, let's say, covering a family, there's just the added expense of $25,000 for the borough, and you can't control that. It's out of your hands. So anyway, we've budgeted for a 15% increase to be safe. That would mean an additional $180,000 for the borough.
So, Jody?
Yes.
So just, I don't know if this is called hypothetical or not, but historic or whatever you want to call it. So we don't have any contingency money.
Nope.
And normally we budget $80,000.
Yes.
So, and we generally use half. So
yes.
We can be looking for a $40,000 supplemental if things continue historically.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
we'd have to come back to the assembly and ask permission and hope that we, our general fund.
That could be another $40,000 added to the budget. Pretty assured. Not assured, but historically that's what we do. Just trying to wrap my mind around the numbers.
Okay.
Thanks.
It's been a long day.
So is there any questions from the assembly or anything you want to talk about? Member Bucci and Member Walhutter?
So how do we reduce the budget? That's what I want to do. I want to reduce the budget.
Come up with a proposal, I guess.
Well, I've talked about privatizing parts of Public Works, privatizing part of the sanitation department. How do we get ideas into the budget to reduce the budget? I'm all for, I don't want a balanced budget, I want a reduced budget. That's what I want personally. And how do we get there? What do we do?
Can I just interject something here? Just over the past decade or whatever, sitting and listening to communities that have had to cut positions that were, PERS employees, then you have the termination study that you're required to do, which is costly, and that's broke some communities. Some have been forgiven that debt. And if they're union, if I'm not mistaken, you can't just eliminate positions without a cost.
That's correct. There's severance.
So there's...
Sure. But I'm not suggesting that we eliminate positions. I'm suggesting that we look at putting parts of city services out to private enterprise to see if they can do it at a cheaper rate than the borough can. That's sort of, I mean, how do we know unless we look?
I'll answer it. I'm going to sound sarcastic, and I apologize.
That's fine.
Get 3 other people to agree with you. Okay, so we can definitely look at, what would somebody, private sector, charge us to remove snow, as an example. I know, and again, it's not apples to apples, but we used to use an outside contractor to pick up recycling. And it was a lot more than paying our own people to do it. My guess is snow removal would be pretty similar. Don't know that. Clearly, if 4 members of the assembly say, hey, go get proposals to do our snow routes, then that's what we're going to do. If you look at our budget, the cost drivers right now tend to be personnel, and a lot of that's healthcare. The only way to get rid of the healthcare portion of it is to not have people. And so, the real cost savings is not having somebody else plow our streets. It's having somebody else plow the streets and the employees aren't there anymore, so that we're not paying the benefits. So, again, I'm not saying that that's not an idea worth looking into, but it's going to come down to people, and it's also going to come down to services. What is the community going to accept? I suggested, 8 hours from the library schedule and 8 hours from Parks and Rec, and this room was full. And that's, what do we say that was going to save us? 30,000, I think, total. If you truly want that budget to get a lot smaller, we're going to have to talk about a lot of cuts in services. That's Jim's sergeant position and the EMS coordinator, and we shut Parks and Rec down, or we say we're not going to fund assisted living anymore. And again, I will help with that process, but the assembly has to decide where you want to go with this.
Yeah, I think we have Member Walher, and then Member Shannon Gregor, then Member Borough.
Thank you. I've said it before, I think we could do this maybe through attrition. I think what we ought to do is just, have a hiring freeze, so to speak, and in positions in which we can do that. Obviously, we have to have a certain amount of people up in assisted living and elderly housing to be able to cover the requirements, from the state and the feds. But in other positions, we could go ahead and just, if somebody retires, and maybe not fill it if we can afford to, get away with filling it. And then we'll just wait until the people start screaming, because right now we're really comfortable. Because we've got people employed right now. We're getting our roads plowed, we're getting the potholes filled, we're getting the sewer systems worked on. But the minute that stops, because we don't have the people to do it, unfortunately, it's just like anything. I think we're going to have to take a real hard look at what we're willing to live without. So, anyway, but I would say through attrition would be my suggestion. Thank you.
Member Burrell?
Well, speaking of that, is there a way, Jody, that we can get the number of employees per department, that like from 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, and just to see where we are, how many personnel we were using at that time?
Yeah, I think so.
So right now we have an idea of positions that have been filled.
Member Stan Gregor?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's more of a philosophical point about the budget. I don't want to see a drastic reduction to our budget, and I'm not trying to compare you in a bad light here, Member Muthy, so bear with me. The analogy I'm going to make is that's what Governor Dunleavy is doing right now, proposing drastic, scary cuts that impact people's everyday lives, as evidenced by many of the things you noted, Director Tao. I can split some hairs on pieces of your budget right now. As I already mentioned, a couple things I'd like to talk about further. But for those listening at home, all the department heads are well aware of what Dunleavy's potential for reductions are right now and have been working diligently to try to, as best they can, get ahead of some of these major reductions or find potential solutions. And the reality is, if things are really bad with some of those cuts, the solutions aren't good. I'm not trying to be doom and gloom and give people pause with that, but the people I'm sitting in the room with right now have been working on that for a while, and what they brought forward right now is the best budget I think they can come up with, given some of the massive uncertainties. And something else for the people listening at home right now is is my prediction, for whatever it's worth, is no matter what we pass with this budget, we will be coming back with a supplemental of some kind, given the unknowns of what the state is doing. This won't be the last time we're talking about our 2020 budget. There's too much of a moving target, in my humble opinion, from Governor Dunleavy. At this point, we're trying to do our best, and doing so with creating efficiencies or minor reductions in some areas resonates much better with me, as opposed to really start hacking and cutting until, if we need to. Yeah, so that's more of my philosophical take on this budget right now, as opposed to any specifics. That's all.
Member Lynn or Norheim, you have something you want to add?
I guess it's with the proposed cuts, if he is going to cut so much there, the only reason I could see that it would be to, I guess, try and shock people into being responsible themselves to pay for the things that they want. So you would be getting your dividend, but you'll be getting reduced state funding for your services. Therefore, it becomes your responsibility to take that dividend and donate to the borough. And yeah, you can smirk and all, it's funny. Nobody's going to give up their own money to do that, but that's the trade-off. You don't want the taxes? Well, then you need to be responsible and do it yourself.
Member Lim.
I think I'm closer to Member Stanton Greger. I'd like to see some stability, maintain some stability in the budget. I'm not in for great big cuts. I'd like to maintain the school funding that the way we have it here. I think it's necessary. I think the school is in for some cuts. I just don't see any way around that, watching the politics at the state level. That said, I'm also want to be very cautious. I would not be willing to fill any positions at this time until we see how things occur at the state level. Because as the manager says, if you have to cut the amount of money out of that, if we didn't get the raw fish tax, we got much more serious discussions here. But I also think we need to have those in the meantime. But in the meantime, maintain a little more stable economy here, or state or local government.
Member Ricci.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've said this from day one. We've been talking about the budget. I don't think we need to wait for the governor to tell us what we're going to do with the community of Petersburg. I think we need to kind of sort out what's important to the community of Petersburg and figure out whether or not we can pay for it. I mean, the police department and EMS, they're very important to the community. I don't think it makes any difference at all what the governor says to us. I mean, if there's cuts to the school, then we'll sort that out and we'll pay for that. But I mean, I don't think it's up to the state government to tell us locally what's important. I mean, I think this is our responsibility to kind of say what's important. Whether we want the certain departments open 7 days a week or less. I mean, I think it's up to us to kind of sort all that stuff out. I mean, whether the streets need to be paved at certain times and this, that, and I think it's up to the Borough of Petersburg and the Assembly of Petersburg to reduce the budget. I mean, that's where I've been going from day one. I want to reduce stuff. We can't afford, to pay for things the way that we have in the past. And I think it's up to us to kind of set our own priorities, not the governor to tell us what he thinks is important to the city of Petersburg. I'm just, and I'll continue to voice my concerns as long as I can. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Just to interject my thoughts, I guess everybody else has said theirs. I kind of agree with Member Mucci on it's not up to the borough to have the governor tell us what our priorities are and what we're going to do, but when he takes $1 million away from you, he's kind of setting the stage for what you have to, what you have to do. I mean, the raw fish tax alone is $800,000, has averaged the last 10 years. And I know a lot of communities, us included, have drafted resolutions and sent them to the governor, and our legislators opposing the proposed budget by the governor. And there's not just the municipalities that are working, opposing the Governor Dunleavy's budget. I had a phone call today from former Governor Walker, and he's working for an attorney firm now, and they're working for a number of communities, a lot of coastal communities, and one of the topics they're going to bring up is the raw fish tax. And they're going to, they're going to, advocate to keep it, and maybe it'll happen. But then, is the governor going to go after PERS? So who knows what's next? I don't think he's going to give up. So it's going to be tough. That's how we're going to end up figuring this all out. But just so the Assembly knows, since we passed that resolution Monday, one of the whereases was asking for the governor not to cut the raw fish tax, and I told Mr. Walker that we would sign on to it, and there's no monetary responsibility, so it's not going to cost us anything, and I don't know how he's going to do that. And so he wanted a copy of our resolution. He's going to get a hold of the clerk, or the clerk's going to get a hold of him, and then and it is a little bit time sensitive. They want to get something out within 10 days. So if we needed to call a special meeting, if the Assembly members felt we did, just to go over that, I felt comfortable with telling him we would sign on to it. You've got Pat Branson from Kodiak. You've got Kelty from Dutch Harbor. A lot of the main port, communities that rely on the raw fish tax are signing on to this. So anyway, just thought I'd give you an update. It's not just municipalities that are doing this. It's a law firm is getting involved, and I don't know how they're getting paid or why they're doing it, but anyway, so that's my opinion. I'm sure the next time we cover this topic, the room's going to be rather full. So, Member Mucci.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have no problem with you dealing with former Governor Walker, but I'm just trying to sort out what's the best way to get my suggestions to the Assembly to reduce the budget. What does the city manager do? I need to get it at an Assembly meeting so everybody can kind of say, yeah, I agree with that or not? I'm just trying to sort out how do I get my budget reductions addressed in a formal setting?
I think you'd have to do it in one of the next 3 readings that we have scheduled, and just make a motion, and then maybe correct me if I'm wrong.
No, you're right.
But make a motion to reduce the budget and give X, Y, Z, or ABC, whatever you want to call them, and 10% here, 20% there, to come up with the numbers you want, and then that is how I think the proper procedure would be. So.
Can I add to that, Mr. Mayor?
Yes, Mr. Stanton.
Yeah, I mean, simply put, Member Mucci, I think just any amendment to the budget with any idea you've got, like, 4 of us on board, it's in the budget. Like, with what we've got right now as our starting point, and as with every year, there's, depending on how many amendments, like, I believe there's no limit to how many you could propose.
Sure.
Yeah, so I think that is the process.
Does that sound like the right procedure to the staff? I mean, that's the way I think it would be done. I mean, it's the Assembly's budget at this point, so.
Yep. Thank you.
All right. So we're working with the staff proposed budget, like all the municipalities are working with the governor's proposed budget, then
We're nicer.
we'll go from there. At least Jody puts smiley face things on the end of her presentation to try to get a chuckle out of us before we
chop off the
go home and stay awake. So anyway, is there any other questions or anything else you wanted to add, Jody? No. Member Lynn, did you?
Yeah, I just want to thank Carl and Chris for the 5-year plans they put together. I thought that what they did was very credible, and it allows us to look down the road at some of the things that we really have to do, particularly for infrastructure. So I thank you. I think there needs to be more work done in the harbor since we don't have any projects after 2020. I guess we're okay.
Okay, well, with that being said, if there's nothing else to add, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn. Second. Okay, all those in favor say aye. Aye. I'm going to say say like a step in all this finance.